Welcome to the channel. Hit subscribe and dive into stories that'll stay with you long after the video ends. Let's begin. The crowd froze the instant the boy stepped onto the cracked asphalt court barefoot. A hot wind pushed dust across the faded three-point line, and a low murmur rolled through the spectators like a warning. No one knew his name. No team jersey. No sneakers. Just a thin, sunburned kid with steady eyes and a calmness that didn't match the chaos around him. "Hey kid," one of the older players called out, half laughing. "You lost your shoes or something?" The boy didn't answer. He just looked at the ball. The game was supposed to decide everything: which neighborhood team would represent the district tournament. Pride was on the line, reputation, a chance at being noticed. For some of these players, it meant escape. And then this barefoot stranger walked in. He moved toward the referee, a tall man with salt in his beard and the tired expression of someone who had seen too many petty disputes on this court. "You want in?" the referee asked. The boy nodded once. "No shoes, no play," someone shouted from the sidelines. But the referee held up his hand, studying the boy with a strange hesitation, as though he recognized something unspoken, something familiar. "All right," the ref said quietly. "If he's brave enough to play like that, let him." The crowd erupted with disbelief. Two players threw up their hands. Another muttered, "This is a joke." But the boy had already taken his place at midcourt. A thin, trembling silence settled over the arena of mismatched bleachers and leaning fences. Even the birds seemed to pause. The opposing team stared at him with looks that said easy target. No one knew that this moment was the beginning of something none of them were prepared to witness. The whistle blew, and the ball snapped into motion. The boy moved before anyone else, sliding across hot pavement with a quiet precision that made the defenders blink. His bare feet tapped against the ground like soft percussion, swift and controlled. A player lunged at him. He spun past. Another reached for the ball. He slipped under the arm like mist. "Who is this kid?" a spectator whispered. The sun glinted in his eyes as he dribbled, gaze focused beyond the court, as if chasing something no one else could see. His pace wasn't frantic, but deliberate, measured, patient, like someone who'd learned to survive storms much larger than a basketball game. He reached the rim, leapt, the ball kissed the backboard and dropped clean through. The entire court fell silent. For a full second, no one even breathed. The boy landed lightly, the soles of his feet hitting the pavement without a flinch, without pain. He walked away from the basket as though scoring like that was just another heartbeat. The opposing team stared at him, stunned. They weren't afraid yet, not fully, but something new had started to grow in their expressions: doubt. Again, one of his new teammates whispered, disbelief shaking his voice. The boy simply nodded. And as the ball was inbounded, as the crowd slowly regained its voice, as whispers turned into rising tension, something else stirred behind the court, a figure watching, waiting. The boy glanced that way for the briefest moment. Then the ball flew toward him again, and everything that mattered next had already begun. The game surged forward, but an unease rippled beneath every play, like a wire stretched too tight. The barefoot boy, still nameless, moved with an instinct the others couldn't match. He didn't dribble so much as guide the ball, his steps light despite the blistering pavement. The crowd, drawn first by curiosity, now leaned forward for every touch he made. His teammates tried to adjust to him, trying to keep up, trying to understand. "Hey, what's your name?" one of them asked during a pause. The boy didn't answer. He just breathed slowly, eyes fixed on the court as though the lines told a story only he could read. The referee watched him with an expression that bordered on haunted recognition. Play resumed. A defender, frustrated and embarrassed from earlier, decided to test the boy's limits. He rammed his shoulder forward, aiming to knock him off balance. The boy absorbed the hit, barely moving. A hush swept over the crowd. He cut left, right, then glided through two players with a suddenness that drew gasps. A layup. Another point. But even as cheers erupted, the boy didn't smile. He didn't acknowledge the praise. He focused on something else, something that tugged at the air behind him. Again the crowd followed his gaze. A man stood beyond the fence. Tall, dust-coated boots, a stare like a storm. When the boy noticed him, his breath hitched, just once, a flicker. Then he forced his attention back to the game. The opposing team tightened their formation. They didn't like being outplayed by a kid with no shoes and no past. "Double him," their captain snarled. "Make him bleed." The next play was brutal. 3 defenders trapped him at half court. Elbows collided. Hands grabbed his arms. Someone stepped intentionally on his bare foot. A shout tore from the crowd. The referee's whistle cut through the noise, but the boy had already slipped free, twisting out of the pressure with impossible agility. The ball sailed across the court to a teammate completely open. Three-pointer. The crowd exploded. For the first time, the boy's teammates looked at him not with curiosity but with awe. "How are you doing this?" one asked. The barefoot boy wiped sweat from his brow but still didn't speak. Instead, he touched a faint scar near his ankle, thin, jagged, almost hidden. The man behind the fence shifted his weight. The boy saw, and fear, small, flickering, passed across his face. The quarter ended on that note, the scoreboard reflecting a shift no one could ignore. The boy had turned the tide, and everyone knew it. The opposing team regrouped in tight circles, their voices low, their anger simmering. The crowd buzzed with speculation. Where's he from? Who taught him to move like that? Why won't he talk? But beneath all of those questions was a quieter one, whispered like a rumor no one wanted to say too loudly. Who is that man watching him? The boy stood alone during the break, staring at the ground, chest rising and falling like he was fighting something deeper than exhaustion. The whistle blew for the next quarter, and whatever silence he'd been carrying was about to crack. The next quarter opened with an intensity the court hadn't seen in years. Dust rose in swirling patches as players collided, sprinted, and shouted commands over the thundering cheers. But the boy, always the boy, moved through the chaos like he'd trained for it in places far harsher than this cracked neighborhood court. Still, something in him had started to tremble. Each time he glided past a defender, his eyes flickered toward the man beyond the fence. The stranger didn't clap, didn't shout, didn't show emotion. He only watched, waiting. The boy's breathing grew uneven. "Kid," one teammate said, stepping closer between plays. "You good?" The boy opened his mouth. A whisper escaped. "He found me." But before the teammate could ask what he meant, the referee's whistle forced them back into action. The opposing team came in ruthless this time, determined not just to win but to break the boy's momentum. They hacked, shoved, and grabbed at him, pulling at his arms, driving knees into his legs. One hit knocked him to the ground. A gasp tore through the crowd. The boy landed hard, palms scraping against rough asphalt, skin burning. A smear of blood appeared across his knuckles, and for a moment he stayed there, head lowered, breath shaking. The man behind the fence took one slow step forward. The boy's eyes widened. He pushed himself up. "No foul," someone shouted angrily. The ref hesitated and then shook his head. His gaze drifted toward the man at the fence. His jaw tightened. The game continued. A defender approached the boy with a sneer, "You're done, barefoot." But the boy didn't flinch. He moved with a burst, a sudden acceleration that made everyone blink. He weaved through bodies like he was escaping something far more dangerous than a double team. He leapt. The dunk rattled the rim. The crowd erupted in shock, rising to their feet as the boy hung in the air for a single defiant heartbeat before dropping down again. Cheers stormed through the court, but the boy didn't celebrate. He stepped backward, breath sharp, skin trembling as he faced the man behind the fence. His whisper barely reached his teammates. "I can't go back." A chill ran through the players closest to him. The man watching finally spoke, voice low and gravelly, drifting across the boundary. "Come here," he said. Just 2 words, but heavy enough to smother the noise around them. The boy froze. The referee stiffened. Even the opposing team stopped mid-huddle. "Get back to the game, kid," the man added. "We talk after." But the boy shook his head, small, terrified. "No." The quarter buzzer screamed. The crowd jolted from the tension, unsure what they had just witnessed. The boy staggered toward the bench, rubbing the scar on his ankle as though it burned. His teammates exchanged glances, confusion shading into worry. The man behind the fence didn't leave. He stayed, waiting, silent. And the boy's fear had now become impossible to hide. The fourth quarter began under a sky that had darkened to a bruised shade, as though the clouds themselves felt the weight crushing the court. The score was painfully close now, 1 basket separating the teams. Every possession mattered. Every breath seemed louder than the last. But the barefoot boy wasn't thinking about the score. He was thinking about escape. The man behind the fence hadn't moved. He stood like a shadow burned into the landscape, watching with the certainty of someone who believed time would eventually bend in his favor. The boy's pulse hammered. "Don't look at him," one teammate muttered urgently. "We need you, stay with us, just finish the game." But the boy shook his head. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Then tell us." He hesitated, then pulled his pant leg up a few inches. The scar near his ankle, jagged and circular, caught the dimming light. "That's from him," the boy said. "He said it would remind me so I'd never think I could run far." A shiver ran through the teammate. "What is he to you?" he asked softly. The boy's voice cracked. "He's the reason I ran without shoes." Before more could be said, the ball slammed into a player's chest. Game on. The barefoot boy forced himself into motion. His first few steps were shaky, legs stiff with dread. But as he felt the court beneath him, the heat, the grit, the familiar burn, some small part of him steadied. The game had become more than a competition. It was the only shield he had left. The opposing team sensed his distraction. They launched into a furious offensive, passing with manic precision, driving toward the rim, desperate to regain control. 2 quick scores put them ahead. The crowd groaned. The boy inhaled slowly, eyes narrowing. Something old, something born from nights of running and mornings of hiding, flickered to life inside him. He demanded the ball. At first his teammates hesitated, but his stare, sharp, determined, left no room for doubt. They passed it to him. He pushed off his bare feet and exploded forward. Every sensation sharpened, the sting of pavement, the slap of the ball, the burn of lungs pushing to the limit. He weaved through defenders with movements so fluid it felt like the court had tilted in his favor. A fake, a spin, a leap, he scored. The scoreboard beeped, the gap narrowed, but the boy didn't stop to breathe. He snatched the ball again on defense, darting between taller players with impossible speed, refusing to be contained. Another point, tie game, the crowd roared. But as the noise surged, the man behind the fence finally stepped inside the gate. One slow stride, then another. Security glanced his way but hesitated. Something about his presence, his confidence, his certainty made them hold back. The boy felt the shift in the air before he saw it. He spun, eyes wide. He whispered one word, barely audible over the echoing cheers. "No." The man took one more step onto the court's edge. And the final minute began. Time thickened. Each second stretched with unbearable weight as the final minute ticked down. The barefoot boy stood at midcourt, sweat dripping from his hair, chest rising in trembling bursts. Across from him, defenders crouched low, ready. Behind him, the man lingered just inside the boundary line, his shadow cutting across the faded paint. The boy swallowed hard. The ball was inbounded. He caught it, almost fumbled, hands shaking. But the moment he felt the ball's familiar heartbeat, something in him steeled. He moved. The defenders closed in fast. The boy cut between them with desperate precision, pivoting on raw instinct. His feet slapped the ground harder now, no longer graceful but urgent, frantic. A hand grabbed his arm. Another pushed at his shoulder. "Foul!" The crowd screamed, but the whistle stayed silent. The boy fought on. He broke through the trap with a force born from survival, not skill. His breaths tore out in ragged bursts, his vision blurred at the edges. But he kept going, kept pushing, knowing that stopping meant more than losing a game. He reached the free throw line. A defender loomed in front of him. The boy hesitated, eyes flicking to the man behind him. The man spoke softly, darkly, for only the boy to hear. "Come home." The boy's grip tightened, his jaw clenched. "No," he whispered. He drove forward. The final defender slammed into him. The boy stumbled, nearly fell, but caught himself on one palm. The impact ripped a new layer of skin, but he didn't stop. He rose, lifted the ball, and shot. Silence crushed the court. The ball arced high, too high. For a moment, despair flickered in the boy's eyes. But as it descended, it curved, drifting toward the rim with impossible grace. The ball dropped clean through the net. The buzzer blasted. The crowd erupted, exploding into screams that shook the fences. Teammates stormed the court, grabbing the boy, lifting him, cheering until their voices cracked. But the boy wasn't listening to any of it. He turned. The man had stepped fully onto the court now. The chaos muffled, fading into a distant roar as the two locked eyes. The man nodded once. "Let's go." The boy's heart thundered. His vision swam. Memories, too many, too heavy, flashed behind his eyes. All the nights he'd run barefoot. All the times he'd been told he belonged to someone else. All the scars that marked his skin like warnings. He took one step back, then another. His teammates noticed. "Hey, what's wrong?" The boy blinked, breath trembling. "I'm not going with him." The man's expression hardened, not with anger but with cold expectation. "You don't decide that," but he did. The boy lifted his chin, shoulders squared, voice steady despite the quake inside it. "I just did." For a moment the man didn't move. Then security, finally breaking from their paralysis, closed in. The man raised his hands reluctantly, backing away with a look that promised this wasn't the end. But for the boy it was. He exhaled shakily, a single tear slipping down his cheek as the weight he'd carried for years finally began to crumble. The crowd, unaware of the deeper war he'd just won, cheered his name, his real name, which he finally whispered to them when they asked. The boy without shoes had won the game, but more importantly, he'd won his freedom. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and visit the channel for more real-life stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark.